Hello, I'm Dr. Mohua Bhattacharjee. Today we'll be taking a new topic which is called Quasi Rent. Quasi Rent is also a topic, is a concept which was given by Marshall, and in which he has tried to connect the concept rent in relation to the earning of the capital equipment. Now, what is quasi rent? Quasi rent is something when is a short run earning of a capital equipment. Now, what happens? The capital equipments in a short run, we take care of only the total variable cost. So we ignore the fixed cost while measuring the total cost. So that's why in the short run it is said that all the capital equipments earn a temporary surplus. This is obviously it's a short run earning, and it has to be a temporary surplus. So it has a temporary surplus, and which is over the total variable cost. So that's why quasi rent is considered to be the excess of the total revenue over the average over the total variable cost. So this is something which variable cost, as you know, it's a short run cost which has been used in all the raw materials or the temporary laborers who have been employed for a very short time. So these costs are which is incurred in the short term, and so whatever revenue you have earned in the in a time period, and whatever cost has been incurred, the variable cost which has been incurred in this short time period, when you subtract that, the capital equipment expenditure, the variable cost expenditure, or the total variable cost from the total revenue, whatever earning is left out, that is called the quasi rent. And it is to be understood that the quasi rent concept does not, or the quasi rent does not continue in the long run when the capital equipment expenditure is taken in the for a long term period. So capital equipment, when it is used in the short term with the variable factors, that time whatever income is generated by those capital within the short term with the use of the variable cost, that income is considered to be the quasi rent. And that's why quasi rent is, that's why it's considered to be the surplus or the extra revenue over the variable cost, average variable cost, and total variable cost. And so the variable cost, as you know, is nothing but the short run cost, and it is the expenditure which is incurred in the variable inputs. And so if we take this example, this simple diagram, we can find out that these are our price lines, and in the price line it's been intersected by the MC curve, and the MC curve gets the E1, E2 and E3 as an equilibrium with an equilibrium employment of Q1, Q2 and Q3, and the rent is R1, R2, R3, and this is the average variable cost. And the average variable cost is something which is derived from the total variable cost, and it is the TVC minus Q. So when we plot the average variable cost on the diagram, this is the point at E1 where the revenue is this O, Q1, E1, R1, and the average variable cost is also O, Q1, E1, R1. So at this employment, the factor or the capital equipment is not earning any rent, or it is not earning the quasi rent. But when the rent has gone up to R2, we can understand, or we can see that this is our variable cost curve, average variable cost curve, and this is our equilibrium employment, and so this part is the extra revenue which is called the quasi rent. And further, if we go up to the higher part, then we can understand that this is the revenue, and this is the additional revenue which has been earned, and this is with the R3 rent, this is the additional rent or the quasi rent which is earned by the capital equipment with the increase of the rent. So that is what it has been trying to say, that in the short run, when the average variable cost is intersecting the price line at a one point at which it just covers, when the revenue just covers the variable cost, average variable cost, it does not earn rent. Just to take numerically, suppose a land has got average variable cost of 100 rupees, and the land has, from selling corn, it is also from selling, it is not a thing, it's a capital equipment utilization. It's a short run capital equipment utilization. So whatever it has been producing, it is earning revenue of 100. So this is your total revenue and it is your average variable cost. So in this case, the quasi rent will be 0, which has been plotted by the R1. This is by the R1 case. But now suppose, for example, the total revenue has increased to 500 rupees and your average variable cost has also suppose gone up. This is your average variable cost. This is your average variable cost and this is your 500 rupees. So this is the gap, and so suppose 200 is your average variable cost. So then 300 is your quasi rent. So this is something which is very simple and it is considered, but the point is that this is something which will only remain in short run. That is, it is a very temporary surplus. The moment the capital equipment will go on utilizing itself for a longer time period, the average variable cost will be of no use, because we have to take care of the fixed cost also, which is getting depreciated or which is getting utilized, and whose expenditure also has to be subtracted from the total revenue earned to get the revenue, to get the rent. So that's why the quasi rent concept is a very temporary surplus earning of a capital equipment, which gets nullified in the long run when the fixed cost utilization also has to be taken into consideration. So that's why the quasi rent concept is considered to be a temporary income of capital equipment. But the only point is, then why did this concept came up? Why? So one case we had a simple rent, general land rent, then we went to economic rent, then we came to the quasi rent. Why did we do these things? It is only to use the topic rent in a much more generalized, in a much more bigger and a broader concept. That's all. But because the rent concept has got somewhat its own limitation, we had to keep the assumption of such that within its assumption it can be made dynamic. So to make the model of rent or the concept rent dynamic, we made some transformation, or we made some changes, we made some assumptions. Like for example, when we went to the quasi rent, we assumed that our time period is short, but we are using it for the capitals, for the machineries. We are not concentrating only on labors or on land. So we are going to in the capitals also. So we are trying to utilize the concept of rent in a much more broader spectrum. That is our only purpose, to broaden, to magnify the concept. But we can't make the topic or the rent lose its own originality. So that's why there are some surrounding assumptions which had to be always been restricted. For example, in quasi rent we had to keep this, that it is a short run cost or it's a temporary earning. In the long run it will get nullified. But when we went into the economic rent, we had to bring the concept of the transfer earning. So there is something which we always had to hold on, by which the topic rent could be made generalized, could be made broadened. So this is something which has to be worked out, and by which the term rent has been magnified or been broadened, which was only by Ricardo. As an income of the factors of production, he came up with a Ricardian theory of rent, and it was something which was considered that it is an end. But it was not an end. Modern economists has worked out a lot, and then they brought out this economic rent concept, in which all the factors of our production could use the terminology rent. But after this, something which was like capital equipment is something which is very capital equipment is something which was very difficult to get used with the terminology rent. So Marshall went into ahead and used the term rent by making this strong assumption of only variable cost. So this is something by which we wind up the topic rent, and we clear the concept of the factors of production earning, especially in the context of land. Thank you.